Hello, my name is Pastor Andy Schreier from Redeemer Lutheran Church. A number of years ago, one of the Spanish-speaking members of our church asked me to say a prayer on Sunday morning for her grandfather who lived in Mexico. He had been diagnosed with cancer. His name was Crescencio. In Spanish, they called him Don Chencho. So that Sunday, we prayed for Don Chencho. For the next number of Sundays, we prayed for him in his struggle with his cancer. Well, after a number of weeks of praying for him, on a Thursday afternoon, the member of our church called me up and told me that he had spent the last few nights and barely slept at all. He was very anxious and agitated and couldn't sleep, and it seemed like he didn't have much longer to live here on earth. And I said I was sorry, and I asked her if there's anything I could do, and she said, "Well, actually, Pastor, there is. Would you mind calling him?" You understand that he lived in this tiny little ranch in the middle of Guanajuato, Mexico. I never met him or any of his family. I didn't know him from Adam. And the other thing she told me was that the cancer had invaded his throat to the point where he could barely talk. So he wouldn't be able to talk to me, but she wanted to know if I could call him and just talk to him on the phone. She said if I called her mom, his daughter, would answer the phone, and that she'd hold the phone up for him to listen. Well, I said, okay. And later that day, I got the nerve and I made that phone call down to Mexico. And our member's mother answered the phone. I talked with her a long time about God's promises, about Jesus and forgiveness and heaven, and the peace and strength God gives us through those promises. And then she asked me would I like to talk to her father with Don Chencho. I said, okay. So she held up the phone to his ear. Now remember, he couldn't talk back to me, so I was just talking. And I talked to him about Jesus and about the forgiveness Jesus won for us on the cross. I reminded him of Jesus' promise in John chapter 10, where he said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though he dies." And after talking to him a little bit more about heaven and God's promises, I hung up the phone, not knowing if he had heard me, if he understood what I was saying, if he was even there while I was talking that whole time. Well, the next morning, a member of our church called me up, and she said she had talked to her mom, and that for the first time in days, her grandfather, Don Chencho, had slept that night. And right before he went to bed, he was able to get out a few words to his daughter, and he whispered to her that he could finally sleep in peace because he knew that God had forgiven him and that he was going to heaven. Just a few days later, on that next Sunday, about 9:30 at night, a member of our church called me up that her grandfather, Don Chencho, had passed away. Now, before he spoke to me, Don Chencho believed in God. He knew who Jesus was and that he was his Savior, but he had his doubts. He didn't really understand what it meant that Jesus had won for him forgiveness. He didn't have that comfort and certainty of the heaven that Jesus promises. But all that changed with a simple phone call. The question I have for you today is, do you have somebody you could call? Somebody who's struggling in their faith or going through a hard time, maybe a son or daughter, a grandchild, a grandparent, a brother or sister, a friend. Sometimes all it takes is a simple phone call. That's hard to do at times. It's hard to get up the nerve to have those difficult, those important conversations, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just reminding them of God's promises, His love, His forgiveness, what Jesus did for them. Sometimes we forget what a difference a simple phone call can make.